today's video, I'm going to show you how to knit a baby blanket design that I am naming Felix. This is a super easy pattern to knit. Not only is there no pattern multiple, you only need to cast on an odd number of stitches, but the repeat is only 8 rows long, so it's really nice and easy to remember, which makes it the perfect blanket for when you want some mindless knitting, and it also makes it really easy for beginner knitters to pick up. I've chosen a really nice pale green for my blanket, but this is a design that I think will work across the whole colour spectrums, from really bright colours like Oscar that I knitted a few weeks ago to a classic pale cream, grey, or even a white. To knit a blanket the same size as my sample blanket, about 60 centimetres wide by 80 centimetres long, you're going to need 400 grams of double knit yarn. If you're not in the UK, then equivalent weights are 3-weight yarn or light worsted weight yarn. I chose to use Stylecraft Bambino in the shade Key Lime, but you could pick any colour you want. You are also going to need some 4mm circular knitting needles, and you want these needles to be about 100 to 120 centimetres long, just so that they are long enough to accommodate all your stitches. Then you're going to need your standard tools of a pair of embroidery scissors and some tapestry needles for sorting out your ends. And last but not least, you want 2 stitch markers, and we use these to mark where the side border ends and the middle textured panel starts, and it just makes knitting so much simpler because you don't have to worry about always counting. Normally when I give you a pattern multiple for one of my blankets, I will give you the middle textured panels separately to those side borders, but with Felix there is actually no pattern multiple, so in this case we don't need to separate those stitches for the side borders out. All that you need to remember to do when you are working this blanket is to cast on an odd number of stitches. So as long as your cast on number is an odd number, this blanket will work. If you want to recreate a blanket the same size as mine, so 60 centimetres wide, you're going to want to cast on 137 stitches in total. For this tutorial, I'm just going to cast on a much smaller sample of 65 stitches, and you can cast on as many or as few stitches as you like, but if you're using the same weight yarn as me and you're wanting to get that similar sized blanket, you want to cast on 137 stitches. As always, I'm using the long tail method for my cast on, but if you have a preferred method that you like to use, please use that one instead. This blanket will still work. This blanket is knitted all in one piece from bottom to top. So the first of the 3 sections that we work for the blanket is that bottom garter stitch border, and that consists of 15 rows worked in exactly the same way. I'm going to walk you through row 1, and then I'm going to leave you to carry on and knit rows 2 to 15 yourself. As the bottom border consists of garter stitch, it's really nice and easy. Every single stitch in the row, with the exception of the final stitch in your row, is a knit stitch, so it's really easy to work. The final stitch of each row is our selvage stitch, and we use a slightly different technique for that stitch, just to give us a really nice neat side edge up those long edges of the blanket. So to start with, for row 1 of your border, you just want to work all the way across and knit all those stitches, and you want to stop when you have just 1 stitch left on your left hand needle, and I will then show you how we work that stitch to get that lovely neat selvage edge. To work this final stitch of the row, we are going to slip the stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. It's really nice and easy to do. So the first thing that you want to do is to get this working yarn to the front of your work. If you are an English knitter, you might want to lift the working yarn to the front of your work, just like that. But I knit continental style, so the way that I hold my yarn to the front of my work is just to pick it up and hold it with my right hand needle, and then I am going to slip that stitch. You want to pop your right hand needle in from right through to left, so as if you were going to purl the stitch. What you don't want to do is go in from left through to right, because you'll twist that stitch, and we don't want to do that at this stage. So pop that needle in from right through to left, slide it firmly onto your right hand needle, and once it's there, you can remove your left hand needle. If, like me, you've held your working yarn with your right hand needle, you want to make sure that your working yarn after working this slip stitch is most definitely at the front of your work. If you don't and you turn your row, you will find that you'll accidentally create a new stitch because you still have that working yarn over the right hand needle when you start your new row. So just make sure that it's very definitely at the front of your work. So that's row 1 of 15 done. What you now need to do is to go away and work rows 2 to 15 in exactly the same manner, and then at the end of row 15 I will rejoin you and show you how we tackle that middle textured panel that forms the bulk of our blanket. The main textured panel that forms the bulk of our blanket consists of 8 rows that we are going to repeat over and over to build length. I'm going to walk you through each of those 8 rows, and then I'm going to explain to you how you build the rest of your blanket and leave you to carry on with that middle textured panel yourself. The first time we work row 1, we're going to do a little bit of setup work just to get those stitch markers in place, but every other time that you work row 1 you are just going to slip those stitch markers instead of placing them. Row 1 starts by knitting 9 stitches. Then you're going to get the first of your 2 stitch markers and you're going to pop it onto your right hand needle. Next you are going to carry on and knit all the way along your row until you are 9 stitches before the end of the row, and that will be when you have 9 stitches left to work on your left hand needle. At that point you are going to get the second of your 2 markers and again pop it onto that right hand needle. Next you want to carry on and knit 8 more stitches, and that should leave you just with 1 stitch left to work. Just like we have done for our bottom garter stitch border, every final stitch of the middle textured panel you are going to slip purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 2, you are going to start by knitting 9 stitches. This is a good point to check that your stitch markers are in the right place, because that 9 stitches should take you to your first stitch marker. Slip the stitch marker over from your left needle to your right needle, and then you are going to purl across until you hit your second marker. Just like with the other marker, you are going to slip the second marker over from the left to the right needle, and then you want to knit the next 8 stitches. Finish off your row by slipping that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 3 is nice and simple. You are going to knit your way all the way along your row. You're going to slip your stitch markers as you come across them, and then when you get to that final stitch of the row, you're going to slip that purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 4, start by knitting the 9 stitches that take you to your first stitch marker. Slip the marker over from the left needle to the right needle, and then you are going to purl your way across your row until you hit that second marker. When you get to it, you're going to slip that second marker over from one needle to the next, and then carry on and knit the next 8 stitches. Last but not least, slip that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Just like row 1 and row 3 before it, row 5 you are going to knit your way along your row, slip your markers as you come to them, and then for that final stitch you're going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 6 is the first of 3 rows that adds that seed stitch texture to the front of our work, but just like all the other rows, you start row 6 by knitting the 9 stitches before that first marker. Slip the marker over, and then you are going to purl 4 stitches. Next you're going to jump into a 2 stitch repeat that you're going to repeat along your row until 3 stitches before your second marker, and that 2 stitch repeat is nice and easy. You are just going to knit 1 and purl 1. all the way across your row until 3 stitches before your second marker. These 3 stitches before your second marker, you are going to purl. Slip the marker over and then knit 8 stitches. Last but not least, slip that last stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 7 starts like all our other rows by knitting the first 9 stitches. That should take you to your first marker, and you're going to slip it over from one needle to the next. Then you are going to knit 5 stitches. Then, just like row 6, you have a 2-stitch repeat that you are going to repeat across your row until 4 stitches before your second marker, and that repeat goes as follows. You are going to purl 1 and then knit 1, and you're going to work that purl 1 knit 1 combination until 4 stitches before your second marker. These 4 stitches before your second marker you want to knit. Slip the marker over and then knit the next 8 stitches. That should leave you with 1 stitch left to work, and you're going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 8 is the last row in our repeat, and it is actually a repeat of row 6, but I will go over it just one more time with you. So start row 8 by knitting 9 stitches. Slip that first marker over and then purl the next 4 stitches. Then you're going to jump into a 2-stitch repeat that you are going to work across your row until 3 stitches before your second marker, and that 2-stitch repeat goes as follows. You are going to knit 1 and purl 1. So it's nice and easy, just 2 stitches worked across your row until 3 stitches before the second marker, and those 2 stitches are a knit 1 and then a purl 1. These 3 stitches here you are going to purl. Then slip your marker over and knit 8 stitches. That'll leave just this final stitch to work, and you are going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. These 8 rows form the building blocks of our blanket, and you will notice as your project grows that every time you knit an odd numbered row, you will have the right side of your work facing you. You will now repeat these 8 rows as many times as you need to get the blanket about 5 to 6 centimetres shorter than you want the overall length to be. For me, for an 80 centimetre long blanket, I repeated these 8 rows a total of 30 times. So after this first initial set of 8 rows, I went away and worked another 29 sets of those 8 rows. And quite simply, you would now go back and repeat row 1 and then work all the way up through to row 8 again, and rinse and repeat until you are happy with how long your blanket is. Then, before we move on to this top garter stitch border, to get symmetry top and bottom, you want to work rows 1 to 5 from the repeat once more and then stop. I will now go away and do that myself, and I will rejoin you after row 5 to show you what we do next and how we build that top garter stitch border. Just like our bottom garter stitch border, the top garter stitch border consists of 15 rows worked in exactly the same way. So once again, I'm going to show you how to work row 1, and then I'm going to leave you to carry on and work rows 2 to 15 yourself. Just a quick pointer about what point you should start your top border. After the end of row 5 of the repeat, when you have worked that partial repeat just to get your stockinette section top and bottom, the first row of your border should be a wrong side row, and what that means is you should have the wrong side of your blanket facing you as you work that first row of your border. As we are working garter stitch for this border, again, it is nice and simple in that you are just going to knit your way all the way across the row. Every stitch, with the exception of the final stitch, is a knit stitch. The only difference for the first row of the border is rather than slipping your markers as you come to them, you can remove them. We don't need to mark our side borders anymore now that we are working the top border, so just take them and pop them to one side. So just like with the bottom garter stitch border, you are going to knit your way all the way along the row, and then when you get to the final stitch of the row, it should be really familiar to you by now, but you are going to slip that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. So that's row 1 of 15 done. I'm now going to go away and work rows 2 to 15, and then I will be back to show you how we cast off and get this from a work in progress on our needles into a finished blanket ready to gift. The last row of any baby blanket is of course the cast off row, and for my blankets I like to use a really nice simple knitted cast off. It matches the way that the cast on that I use looks, and it also matches the sides. In this video I'm just going to show you how to work the first few stitches, but if you need a video that covers this technique in depth, I'm going to link one up here that goes through the whole process in really nice beginner friendly steps. The key to casting off using the knitted cast off is to never have more than 2 stitches on your right hand needle. So you are going to start your cast off by knitting 2 stitches. Make sure when you knit these 2 stitches that you don't knit them too tight, because otherwise when you work your cast off, your blanket will pull in and it won't lay flat. Once you have those 2 stitches on your right hand needle, you're going to get your left hand needle and pop it into the first of those 2 stitches from left through to right. Hold that second stitch onto your right hand needle with your index finger just so it doesn't fall off, and then you're going to use this left hand needle to lift that stitch up over the first stitch and completely off your knitting needle. So you've gone from 2 stitches on this right hand needle down to 1. Then you're going to knit 1 more stitch so that you go back up to 2 stitches on the right hand needle, and you're going to then repeat the process of lifting the first stitch over the second stitch using that left hand needle, going in from left through to right and then lifting that stitch up, over and off the needle. And you're going to repeat that process of knitting 1 and lifting 1 all the way to the end of your row, and I will rejoin you when you have no stitches left on your left hand needle and just 1 final stitch left on this right hand needle. Once you're left with just this final stitch on your right hand needle, you can break your yarn. You want to leave yourself a tail that is long enough to allow you to sew in your ends once you finish off your blanket. I like to leave about 20 to 25 centimeters. I find that's plenty. And then one last thing I like to do to secure this final stitch is to pull up on it to make it a bit bigger. At this point we can get rid of our knitting needles because we don't need those anymore, and then I put my finger and thumb through the stitch, grab the tail and pull it all the way through that enlarged stitch. Then I pull on the tail and give it a really nice tug, and that secures that stitch nicely, and then once you sew in your ends you can't even see that it was there. Just a couple of final bits and bobs to cover before I leave you to your knitting. I always get asked if my blanket designs are reversible, and in the case of Felix, like many designs with stockinette, this is not a reversible pattern. But if I flip it over and show you the reverse side, you can see that it has a texture all of its own, and most importantly, it doesn't look messy. There's no dangling ends, it just doesn't look the same as the front. For those of you that prefer written instructions to work with, I do have a free version of this pattern on my blog, and there are also links there to buy an ad-free PDF for a small fee if you want something that you can print off and take away with you. Last but not least, don't forget that you can knit all of my designs in any weight yarn that you like. You are just going to need to adjust the number of stitches that you cast on and how many repeats that you work. And also don't forget that when you do choose a different weight yarn, you are going to need to change the size of your knitting needles, and your ball band will guide you as to what size knitting needles you need for the weight of yarn that you choose to use. That's all from me for today, but as usual I'm going to leave you with another little bit of knitting inspiration, and I will see you for another tutorial again soon.